Welcome to the conversation. On this particular episode, we speak to Mr. Wayne Golden, attorney at law based in the United States. We'll be examining the latest immigration policies under the new Trump administration. Continue to stay with us after these messages. Welcome back to the conversation. Sir Golden, how are you?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you? Good afternoon.
I can't complain. I'm hoping that you can say the same from where you are now, given your new dispensation.
Well, it's situation normal, but turned up about 100 times more than it was before.
So it's normal, but it's still turned up.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Firstly, I want to talk about the human cost of the crackdowns that we've been hearing about. So the question is, how are Caribbean immigrants coping with the increased threat of mass deportations and policy crackdowns under the new administration?
Well, it's all about the enforcement. I mean, the immigration laws have not really changed, but the enforcement level is to a stratospheric effort in terms of this new administration. And so just like all other immigrants who are here in the United States without status or can't get status or find themselves in a position where they have either come in illegally, overstayed, or been ordered removed, they're in total fear. There have been immigration raids, of course, on the places that immigrants would be found, the ethnic supermarkets, the churches, the schools. So it's turned up, and people are apprehensive about going out into the open. Certain places, people used to work, you don't see them there anymore. Where they used to shop, you don't see them anymore. People are staying off the streets, really.
So do we anticipate any protests similar to what we have been seeing in Michigan?
We anticipate protests, and over the long term, I think as the human side of it starts to play out in public, I think a lot more people would want to show their displeasure in that way. People who weren't even concerned about immigration and deportation before might be dipping their toes in that water of protest, because the human cost is very high. You're talking about families being separated, people being sent back to places that some of them haven't been since they were children, and even those who have tried to do the right thing. They're not, say, criminal persons with criminal records. It's just that they're stuck here. But unfortunately, they're lumped in with everybody else. And now you're hearing about, flights going to Guantanamo Bay to house people being deported. And they're talking about 30,000 more beds being constructed there. So, I mean, the shock and awe of it is really taking effect, I think, right across the nation. And I think more and more you're going to see legal action being taken also to try and prevent some of these draconian measures that are being undertaken.
So from what you have been saying, though, I suspect that there are some communities or advocacy groups that are mobilizing. What kind of strategies do you think that they'll be using to facilitate the pushback?
Well, I tell you what, we have been here before under the previous run that this president had, and people were preparing for that. But this time around, I think the anticipation was even higher. So you have groups like the American Immigration Lawyers Association, which is a group of lawyers, which is, I think, over 40,000 strong here in the United States. They're all strategizing on how they can utilize the courts to really either try and stop some of these actions that are going on. Individuals are suing also.
Oh, so tell us a little bit about that particular group, though. What's the extent of what they're doing, one, what they're willing to do, and the strategies that they're capable of using? Just the sheer size and force that they would have behind them.
Well, what they've been doing is educating the attorneys within the group on how to combat these type of immigration action in their own local community, in their own local immigration courts. Although immigration courts are national, but in the jurisdiction that you would want to practice. Although I can practice, for example, in all 50 states. The rules are the same across all 50 states. But right now we're seeing different things happening in individual states. For example, Florida has just signed an agreement with the Department of Homeland Security, where the state is now going to be using Florida state troopers to enforce immigration laws. When they stop people and they sound different, they don't sound like American, they don't look like American, they're going to be exploring their background. They never used to do that before. They're going to be using the Florida state troopers, for example, to execute warrants, stuff like that. So it's going to be some constitutional challenges. And a group like the American Immigration Lawyers Association, they almost develop a playbook on how to deal with these things. And they have been preparing for it. And also in terms of legislation, they also try to influence legislation that's going to come out to try and block some of these things. So it's an all hands on deck approach. And as I said, it's not that the laws per se have changed. Not yet anyway, but we have these executive orders that have come out directing how to enforce the immigration laws at a higher level. And so what's happening now, incidentally, even people who are American citizens aren't sure of how they protect themselves from being caught up in an immigration raid if they don't have their identification on it and their proof of U.S. citizenship. So this is a complicated ants nest that they've started, and it's going to lead to some serious litigation.
So you're saying that the recommendations are that you should always have your green card at you at all times?
Well, the law is that if you're a legal permanent resident, which is a holder of a green card, you shall have your green card on you at all times. No ifs, ands, or buts. Some people don't want to carry it, but you must. The law says you must carry it, because if you don't carry it, it's actually a misdemeanor offense. However, if you're a U.S. citizen, there's no law that says you have to carry paperwork on you to show your U.S. citizenship, whether naturalized or you're born in the country. So that is causing such fear and trepidation. So people are walking with their passports, people are walking with their citizenship certificate to make sure that if they get caught up in a situation like that, they can declare themselves and they have the proof at hand, which is, you think about South African apartheid and people walking around with passes. You think about days of slavery where people used to have to be walking around with ID to show which master they belong to. So we're back into that frame of mind.
So there was a recent report that have been able to access, and it speaks about the fact that Manhattan was empty to that extent based on the level of fear that's there. One of the questions that I want to ask is how would that affect the tourism income, and what is the general feeling, especially in Manhattan and places like that, that would depend to some extent on tourism?
Well, there is going to definitely be an economic backlash to this whole deportation, because you're talking about workers who work essential jobs here in the United States that people who are in the United States don't want to do. They don't want to do the farming. They don't want to bend their backs to pick tomatoes. They don't want to reach up and pick apples. They don't want to be out there picking strawberries. They don't want to be on the farms, the dairy farms, milking cows and doing that kind of work. So it is ironic that most of these capitalistic type of industries that use migrant labor are now complaining that their businesses will be affected. And some of those very people are the people who voted for this current president to get into office. And people are now kind of backtracking and saying, oh, they didn't know it was going to be this serious. But I think the economics of the situation is really what is going to be the driving force for them to pull back on some of these things that they're doing.
Wow. All right, tell me about the demographic shifts now in key battleground states. How has that affected the sense of security and political engagements among the Caribbean immigrant community, especially in light of his now renewed focus on immigration measures?
Well, it's so funny because in the Caribbean community, we have been discussing the election results and certain groups of people from the Caribbean who actually voted for this administration. And we're talking about those other groups like the Venezuelans who voted en masse for this president, Haitians who did the same thing. And now people from those quarters now are coming out and saying they made a mistake because even the Venezuelans are being affected in mass because of all the raids and what's going on. And some of their statuses that they got coming into the country, running away from the so-called regime in Venezuela, are being revoked and they're being put in deportation. So we don't know in terms of numbers. I can only tell you anecdotally from speaking to a wide cross-section of people and those who are admitting that they voted for this administration, if they could take back time. That's what a lot of them are saying. But unfortunately, we're where we're at, and we're hoping that people will come out and show their displeasure, of course, in a peaceful way. But even that, people are fearing coming out on the street because they don't want to get caught up, so to speak.
Well, all right, with that, we'll go to our first break. Just want to remind you that you're watching The Conversation. I'm speaking with US-based attorney, Mr. Wayne Golden. We'll be right back after the messages. Welcome back to The Conversation. Just before the break, we started looking at a number of things, primarily looking at the human cost of the crackdown. But something that came to mind, though, Sir Golden, was the fact that America has always seemed to have an issue with systemic racism and the backlash. So what I want to find out is how has Donald Trump's policies sought to exacerbate this particular issue, systemic racism and the potential for backlash?
Well, I think what it has done is cement the idea that America, deep at its core, still has that problem. And I think with the election of this administration, it clearly shows that there are many people, the majority that it takes to win an election, who share that same idea, although they don't think that they suffer from the ills of being a racist or somebody who's anti-immigrant. Because, it's so funny because most of the people who are involved in policymaking here in this country, whether from a political or governmental side, are descendants or first or second generation descendants of immigrants. But they seem to forget that very quickly. And as we're seeing, they're hastening to shut the door, slam the door on others who are trying to come in to this country. And they're using this whole fear-mongering tactic to say immigrants are bad people. When studies will show you that immigrants are, first of all, who have built America. They're positive contributors to Jamaica, to the building of America, whether they're from Jamaica, Trinidad, wherever they're coming from, they're coming here for the most part to help to build this country. So I think the backlash will happen eventually. Probably in the next 2 years, you'll see it in the midterm elections.
So help us to understand, though, because sometimes we hear, we're not sure which narrative that we should follow. Is it that the crackdown on immigrants are for undocumented illegals or just immigrants, full stop?
It is for immigrants, but their focus is on those people who are undocumented, meaning that you're in the country without status. For example, you could have come in on an airplane on a visa and you overstay your time.
Oh,
You're illegal. You could have crossed the border without being inspected. You're illegal. You are also having those people who have gone through the immigration court system, and an immigration judge has ordered them deported. And you have those people who are in the system trying to get themselves straightened out, but for whatever reason, it's not happening, and they're being picked up. So the fear is there because you're talking about breaking up of families. Some people who have been here since they're children, people who are married with children, assets, So a whole slew of social issues are going to be generated from this crackdown that I don't even think they're prepared for. And we're going to see more and more of these emotional stories come out. We're hoping the press will start to cover them so people can relate to really what's happening, what is happening when somebody is put in deportation, you're detained. And the one thing people have to understand, immigration law is a civil law. It's not a criminal law, but you do have penalties as if you committed a crime. If you violated the immigration law.
so tell me now, as we look at navigating the legal landscape, there are policy reversals, there are executive orders. What specific legal measures have the Trump administration put in place that can directly affect Caribbean immigrants? And how can these executive orders, can they be implemented immediately? That's the first question that we want to find out.
Well, the minute they're signed, they are implemented. And as far as Caribbean immigrants, I wouldn't say there's something specific in it that says we're targeting Caribbean immigrants. However, Caribbean immigrants, like everybody else, fall into those categories that I spoke about.
Yeah.
People who are here without status for whatever reason. And those people have established a life in this country. And sometimes those very people are people who are supporting their families back home because of the income they make here in the United States. So we are seeing a broad brush effect right across the country. What goes for somebody from the Caribbean also goes for somebody from, most black and brown countries. Because if you notice, the enforcement really is not targeted at the, the Caucasian majority countries. It's being targeted at black and brown countries, Mexico, the Caribbean, Africa.
Okay. Is there a role, though, that the courts can play in helping to determine the validity of these particular measures? And
Absolutely. Absolutely. One big blow that has happened already is the policy that he wanted to put in place to say that you are not a automatic U.S. citizen if your parents don't have legal status in this country, you're born in this country. The courts have blocked that already, ruled against it already. I know it's going to go further into litigation, but so far 2 courts have ruled that they don't think that's constitutional and that there should be a block and a stop on that law. So you're going to see more and more of these legal actions. And it's almost like taking a page out of the Republican books, because while the Biden administration and the Obama administration were in, they filed hundreds and hundreds of lawsuits to block some executive action. So you see, the shoe's on the other foot now, and I think you're going to see and hear about more and more legal action happening.
Wow. All right, so help us to humanize the data. How do you balance the statistical trends now with the personal stories of clients facing renewed legal uncertainties? And how would you say the recent legal battles shape the strategies that you as an attorney would use in order to advocate for the rights of your clients?
Well, my role, as a matter of fact, I'm taking a little break right now because I'm actually in court today. I'm in immigration court today.
Oh.
And immigration court is a starting point to fight a deportation if you're eligible to go to immigration court. And there are several rules and laws that have been adjusted and changed because of the battles we fight in the immigration court itself. The judge rules against you, you have the right to appeal to a higher court. If that court rules against you, then you have the right to appeal to a much higher court. However, it takes time, a lot of time. The average immigration case will take about 4 to 5 years to complete if you're going through all the appellate process. Now, with that being said, if you have somebody who's detained and not released on bond in an immigration court situation, they might choose to leave rather than fight because they don't want to stay locked up, you know? And then there's the other issue of those people who are not eligible to go in front of an immigration judge. For example, if you're in this country for less than 2 years and you're here illegally and you're apprehended, they can expedite your removal from the country without you being able to see a judge.
Have you noticed any inconsistencies in how these policies are being implemented? That's on one hand in different states or even among different immigration judges, though?
I can't say I'm seeing the difference yet because we haven't had so many cases that you can really, extrapolate from there. But I can tell you that even with the prosecutors on the government side in the immigration courts, their hands are sort of tied right now because they can't really make any decisions that they would have ordinarily made until the new policy filters down and they know exactly what track to take as far as policy, whether sometimes you had what is called prosecutorial discretion. They could, somebody's being deported, they could use their discretion and stop deportation. People are filing motions to reopen their cases, they could consent to it. But now they're kind of stymied. They're kind of in a state of flux until the full policy comes to their desk to know what they do. And they have to follow the policy.
Wow. So are there any cases that are trends that you can use to illustrate the tangible effects on some of these policy changes or shifts as well, not just on Caribbean immigrants, obviously, but just generally, particularly in light of the recent court rulings that are blocking some of Trump's immigration measures, at least for now?
Well, for now, we haven't had any rulings that directly block any of the immigration policies that he's put through his executive orders yet. They're in court, they're being litigated. The only executive order that has been under tight scrutiny, as I said, is the citizenship, the birthright citizenship executive order. So, but we are fully expecting what we call a no discretion policy anymore. They're going to say, do not give anybody any equitable relief, meaning, yes, maybe they don't have a way of getting their documents through the regular basis. You put them in court, they have certain applications that they can file through the courts, but usually it also requires the cooperation of the government to exercise discretion, and they're going to object to everything, So we see a battle ahead of us, and we're hoping immigration judges will stand up and say, this is my decision. I know what your policy is, but this is what's fair in the law, and this is what the law says.
All right. So something that you just said about birthright and birthright citizenship, that particular ruling, what are some of the long-term implications that you are seeing on the Caribbean American families, and whether or not that can still be overturned or in terms of an appeal on that?
Well, it's an executive order. It's a constitutional issue, which I'm pretty sure will end up going to the U.S. Supreme Court. And until it does that, I'm pretty sure there will be a hold on any execution of that law. But let me remind you that there are several countries, almost half of the countries in the world have that rule, believe it or not. A friendly country like the Bahamas has a rule about birthright citizenship, that if you are not born to a Bahamian citizen, Bahamian father, you don't get Bahamian citizenship. So it's not common only to the U.S. trying to do this. Other countries have this in place. And that's why people should be careful of when they hear these things, to understand that this is not an overnight thing. This is something that has been thought out for years. And the reason they want to do it is because it affects eventually the voting population.
Last 10 seconds, how do you envision it affecting the voting population, though?
Well, two things are going to happen, and especially with the younger people, I think, who are seeing this reality come to fruition, and the more social minded people, much like those who came out under President Obama. I think you're going to see a resurgence of that in the next election. And the midterm elections, I don't think it bodes well for the sitting president. As history has shown, most midterm elections don't bode well for the sitting president. But if you have a combination of events, including immigration, which is on everybody's lip right now, I think it's going to affect the outcome of the elections, and you're going to see people readjusting their position, so to speak, to be in a much more favorable position moving forward.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Wayne Golden, for your insights and perspective on this particular issue. Continue to stay with us. We will then be joined a little later by another US-based attorney to get his perspective on these immigration issues. Continue to stay after this break. Welcome back to the conversation. We continue in the same vein, looking at immigration policies and the effect of those on Caribbean immigrants. For this particular part of the discussion, we look at the broader impact of such regulations, and we speak with Mr. Winston Tucker, also US-based immigration attorney. Mr. Tucker, how are you?
I am well, thank you. And yourself?
Can't complain any at all.
Good.
You know, and I'm not so fearful that I might be, told I can't stay here. Based on where I am. So,
Okay.
Economic vulnerability, as we look at the broader impacts of some of the policy decisions that have been made by the Trump administration, how are some of those economic challenges intersecting with legal uncertainties for the Caribbean immigrants?
Well, the economic aspect is like this. You have unlawful present workers who, under normal circumstances, they go out on a day-to-day basis and earn a living. Now, in areas where the ICE activities is very, very active, then some are reluctant to go out, and at the same time, they're managing how they go about what they have gotten used to. So I've not heard any significant impact to date on them being able to earn a living.
So do you see where these enforcement policies, whether they can serve to worsen the conditions for businesses and the communities that rely on immigrant labor and support?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And this is the issue that we are somewhat more uncertain about, because the administration to date have said we're going after criminal, unlawfully present persons, first of all, those who have been ordered, removed, or deported, secondly, and those who have been recent arrivals in the United States, and where they are going to be more certain to interact with them and have not been able to, for want of a better word, regularize their status. So that's their major focus. Nevertheless, underneath all of this, for a very long time, have been those who are here who support the economy through working at lower wages than than is normally offered to those who have status. And employment places of employment have somehow depended on them and continue to depend on them. Now, for the most part, this administration is aware of the fact that you have places of employment that have unlawful present workers, but I have not seen where this time around they have been focusing on raiding those establishments. Indeed, it is not legal to employ workers who don't have permission to work. So therefore, to the extent that they're avoiding that, then they see the need to have workers in the United States because it is said time and time again that immigrants, for the most part, especially those who are unlawfully present, do work that Americans will not do, refuse to do. And it is work that has to be done. You take them out of the equation, then you're going to find that there's no one to go pick your tomatoes. There's no one to go out in the fields to bring in your crop. And so you necessarily will find less on the basics of economics 101, supply and demand. The less supply, demand stay the same,
Prices
prices
are
go.
higher. But aren't there, though, based on what you have just said, isn't there a real risk, though, for exploitation of those particular workers?
Yes, you are absolutely right about that, and that happens. At the same time, you have laws that protect those who are even unlawfully present from employers such as those. And yes, it don't protect them to the maximum that as advocates we would like, but it offers some protection.
So you are a lawyer advocate. What are some of the personal concerns that your clients are voicing as far as this whole process is concerned, and how have those narratives served to change your legal strategies going forward?
Well, as a lawyer advocate, you now start to hear individuals coming to you with stories that you know is not true, that you know is somehow impossible. And what you try to do is to inform them as to what the reality is or can be. Uh, as to what I do in my practice on a regular basis is whereas in cases you would invite a potential client to come in for a consultation, I find that I am responding to them in the moment to say, all right, this where we are calls for us to broaden our perspective. So here are the do's and the don'ts.
So as far as resilience is concerned, though, have you seen an increase in say, mental health struggles among the immigrants due to heightened fears of deportation and legal status changes?
At the outset, yes, mental health from the standpoint that you get this heightened concern, this heightened state of confusion,
Oh.
but nevertheless, the population that we are speaking about is resilient because they came here through trial and tribulations that the ordinary person would not take on. So yes, but they're coping.
So have you seen a shift though in how systemic and economic issues affecting immigrant communities are being addressed in terms of, well, or whether or not they're being neglected? So by political leaders subsequent to the elections, especially in response to what you can call the recent legal battles over, say, the birthright citizenship and such.
Well, to an extent, because what you're finding is that this administration have gone about uh, voicing what they want to do and how they're going to do it with a no holds barred mentality, a mentality that drives fear even into the elected representatives. And so now even they themselves are kind of cautious as to how they go out and protect a population that don't vote. They are cautious about how they go out and continue to voice support for a population that, in as small as it is, have elements that come in and get involved with serious crime, or in some instances, crime that one would consider to be a nuisance in the past. However, but with the recent passing of the Lake and Riley bill, you now find that the law says you're here, you are here unlawfully present, or you came in without documentation, and you're not even convicted. You're arrested or charged with a theft crime, then there's a responsibility to take you into custody. That changes the stratosphere. That changes how you normally would operate.
How? To what extent does it change that, though, in terms of how
To
you'd
the
operate?
to the extent that if you're counseling someone in the past and they were charged, it's not a removable offense. Now, the law is saying that you only have to be accused,
Oh,
and it becomes a removable offense. So you now have to be mindful as to whether you say to them, all right, how you go about rectifying your problem.
so based on what you've just said, though, it gives the impression that these policies aren't just symbolic. They are no, in terms of, they have been placed there to rally a particular voter base. You're talking about a real shift in immigration enforcement priorities, right?
Yes, and now the law supports it because in the past, those who are here unlawfully present would only have to be concerned mostly with being picked up. Now, you shifted from being arrested and convicted or being convicted to now being even accused of an offense where you can be taken, not can be, you must be taken into custody. Then that shifts the whole stratosphere. This brings up another issue as to what are the responsibilities we have as advocates to say, well, how you protect yourself. And you have many who are here who are legal permanent residents, for instance, for years and have not bothered to go out and get their citizenship. Now, the law, in essence, speak to non-citizens, the
which would include
naturalization.
which would
the-
include legal permanent residents.
exactly. So it speak up. No, well, non-citizens includes, you're right,
Yeah.
includes legal permanent residents. So even they themselves are at a higher risk of experiencing immigration courts.
All right, so with that, we are going for our final break. Just want to remind you that we are speaking now with Mr. Winston Tucker. He's a US-based immigration attorney. Continue to stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to the conversation where I'm speaking with US-based immigration attorney, Mr. Winston Tucker. So just before the break, we started looking at some of the implications of the policy changes on permanent residents, those who are green card holders. But what I want to find out now, what are some of those concrete steps that Caribbean immigrants, well, immigrants generally, can take to protect their rights and their livelihood in this post-election climate?
I always say you should have a course, Immigration 101, where your plan to migrate to, say, the United States offer you some do's and don'ts because when you're in Rome, you do as the Romans do, and some of the laws in Rome is different from what you have been used to where you're coming from. So this now makes it incumbent on government where immigrants are coming from. Take a deeper interest, start to spend some money because you and I are aware of the great impact that remittances play. So therefore, they should start to invest in programs that will educate their nationals who are migrating. One important point we need to get to is that you have young people migrating with their parents. You have young people following to join their parents. And it's a different terrain.
So,
And I spoke of the issue of citizenship before and how important that is.
so
One,
do you think that that's the role of who, the government? That's say, for example, I'm thinking of leaving here and I'm coming there. Is it that my government here should give me an immigration 101, or you're saying that regular lawyers can actually come together and create such a course and sell it?
your government there should take on that responsibility. The government from whence the person who is migrating.
But
There's
my government doesn't want me to leave. That's most likely the case. The government is typically not in such a rush to get rid of its citizens. So it wouldn't be in their best interest. Well, I'm not seeing where it would be in their best interest.
they're leaving and they're sending back money. Remittances make up, from what I saw last time, 40% of the GDP of Jamaica, since we're speaking from
Yeah.
Jamaica.
So,
That's significant. And I venture to say more than tourism. And I venture to say they have a budget item for tourism.
yeah. Well, for the latest data doesn't seem to indicate that it's more than tourism, at least not this time around, though. But how do you think that lawyers, such as yourself, can help to challenge the policies that might not withstand judicial scrutiny? Because some of these policies might not be able to hold up in court. You know, how can you help to challenge such policies, though, from where you
Well,
stand?
you have organizations who do that through different NGOs and governmental organizations. However, from being on the ground as to how we can help our nationals is to do the advocacy we do that we have been doing through churches, through social organizations, where we going inform them as to what the laws are, how they can go about protecting themselves and their young children, primarily becoming citizens. Secondly, inform them as to what the statistics show as to how you can get involved in an activity that causes you to be removable or deportable.
All right, so how accessible are these legal services, though, for immigrants, and especially those without the financial means to actually access these things? And what role can community organizations play in filling this particular gap?
Well, community organizations, especially through the Caribbean Immigrant Services, which myself and Mr. Irwin Clear have been operating for a number of years, have found that community organizations, churches reach into, reach out to us in times like this to say, all right, we need you to show up to do a forum. And at the same time, even though they're reaching out, we're setting up forums of our own just to go out and inform. And at the same time, we don't take funding. We do this free of cost. Nevertheless, as I pointed before, since remittance plays such a significant part in the Jamaican economy, and not only remittance, the barred economy, that's income too,
Yeah.
money coming in, goods and services. It plays such an important part, even from a management standpoint. Government should look at, all right, this is what we are getting. How do we protect it? What can we do to enhance it, or what can we do to plan for a decline so that our economy can withstand it?
Okay. So how now can the Jamaican diaspora leverage their collective strength and legal advocacy to influence policy? And I'm looking particularly at, say, the key battleground states where immigrant communities could potentially sway the political outcomes.
Well, yes, that has happened. Before I would say 1995, and before the Caribbean Immigrant Services got involved through the Council Generals of the Caribbean, that we put a group together and decided that, listen, it is important that we go out and naturalize as many uh, Caribbean residents as possible, who would have been sitting on their green cards for an average of 15 years, whereas other communities, as they qualified in 5 years, they were applying. So we moved that from 15 years to way less than 50 years. And guess what? In the metropolitan area, you started to see persons who would normally not run for political office,
Yeah.
for school boards, started to put their names in. And so you started to get a greater influence of Caribbean national in governmental services.
So just to be clear, though, you're saying that given the rise of the political influence of our diaspora, the Caribbean diaspora, there has been some greater push for representation within U.S. politics at all levels? That's what you're saying?
Well, yes, but not enough.
Not enough?
Not enough, because nationals here who have become citizens need to understand it is not enough just to become a citizen. You have to go out and vote in every election in greater numbers than you are doing now. And at the same time, one part of advocacy or getting your voice heard is political contributions. We have not gotten to the point we have become sophisticated enough that we need to contribute to those offices that have decided that they're going to watch out for our interests and interests that affect our home country.
All right. So as we draw closer to the end of this particular discussion, what message of empowerment would you offer to community members who are disillusioned by the political process, and how can they become active participant in terms of shaping immigration policy, especially in response to Donald Trump's executive orders?
Well, you do the thing that is most immediate. And I still find that you have too many Caribbean nationals, Jamaican nationals in particular, who are sitting on green cards and not applying for citizenship. And I'll say this whole battle about immigration and immigration policies is seeded by the perception that those who become legal permanent residents and those who become United States citizens have a penchant to vote as Democrats, which is not necessarily true. However, this is what the perception is now. So yes, to change that, you continue to apply for citizenship, become U.S. citizen, your children under 18 derive citizenship through that, and suddenly politicians start to show up at your doorstep. Why? Because you represent currency to them, you represent a vote.
So there is, in fact, power in the collective. Mr. Tucker, we just want to say a big thank you for having taken the time out to speak with us. Now, that's it for tonight on the conversation. A big thanks to, just before this particular segment, we spoke to Mr. Wayne Golden, and now we just spoke to Mr. Winston Tucker, and they broke it down quite well. And now we understand that the road ahead is uncertain, but knowledge is power. And so we're going to say stay informed, stay engaged, and on behalf of the entire CeenTV production team, I'm Kwame Thomas. See you next time for the conversation.